Picture this: a column of Roman soldiers, their sandals kicking up dust under the relentless Mediterranean sun. Their armor clinks with every step, shields slung over backs already aching from miles of marching. Around them, the landscape offers little comfort. No bustling cities, no familiar comforts of home, just the endless grind of campaign life, where every day is a test of endurance. These men weren't just walking, they were conquering, carrying the weight of an empire on their shoulders. But here's the question that rarely gets asked: what kept them going? Not the swords, not the tactics, but the fuel in their bellies. What did Roman soldiers really eat when they were far from Rome's granaries, deep in enemy territory? The answer might shock you. We've all heard the stories of Roman discipline, their legendary training, their unbreakable formations. But an army marches on its stomach, and Rome's legions were no exception. Forget the Hollywood image of lavish feasts around campfires. The truth is far more fascinating and far more ingenious. Imagine feeding tens of thousands of men in the field for months or even years at a time, without refrigeration, without modern supply chains. How did they do it? What secrets did their rations hold that allowed them to outlast their enemies, to build roads and forts while starving out rebellions? This wasn't just about survival, it was a system so effective, it became a weapon in itself. Today, we're peeling back the layers of history to uncover the real diet of Rome's fighting machine. This isn't just a tale of bread and water. We're talking about portable energy, clever preservation tricks, and even battlefield psychology, all packed into the meals that fueled conquest. From the gritty reality of hardtack to the surprising luxuries smuggled in their packs, we'll reveal how food shaped the fate of empires. So grab a seat and maybe a snack, because you're about to discover how Rome's legions turned eating into an art of war. At the heart of Rome's military machine was a deceptively simple system: fermentum, the official grain ration that formed the backbone of every soldier's diet. This wasn't just about handing out sacks of wheat, it was a meticulously calculated lifeline. Each legionary received about 2 pounds of grain per day, usually wheat or barley, enough to grind into flour for bread or mix into a thick porridge like puls. But grain alone couldn't power a soldier marching 20 miles in full gear under a scorching sun. Estimates suggest active legionaries needed between 3,000 to 5,000 calories daily, a demand that turned food into a strategic obsession. Now picture the sheer scale of feeding a single legion. 5,000 men, each needing their daily ration, meant 10,000 pounds of grain every single day. And that's just the baseline. Campaigns stretched for months, sometimes years, requiring supply trains that snaked across conquered territories like lifelines. Enter the muli mariani, Marius's mules, a nickname for legionaries who carried up to 60 pounds of gear, including their own rations, but also for the actual mule trains that hauled the army's food reserves. These convoys were mobile warehouses, guarded as fiercely as the legions themselves, because losing them meant disaster. But here's where Rome's genius kicked in. Instead of relying solely on shipments from Italy, they mastered local foraging. Quartermasters would calculate exactly how much grain to bring versus how much could be seized or purchased en route. Towns near marching routes often found themselves emptying their granaries to feed the inexhaustible appetite of Rome's legions. Yet even with these ruthless efficiencies, shortages happened. Weather delayed convoys, enemies burned fields, and rivers became impassable. That's why every soldier learned to stretch his rations, mixing acorn flour into bread when wheat ran low, or turning to wild greens and whatever game could be hunted. Survival wasn't just about strength, it was about adaptability, turning scarcity into sustenance one meal at a time. The real marvel: this system wasn't just about keeping men alive, it gave Rome an edge. While enemy armies often starved or fractured when supplies ran thin, Roman legions kept moving, building, conquering. Their rations were as much a weapon as their gladius, a silent force that outlasted rebellions and tamed frontiers. Behind every victorious battle cry was the unglamorous truth. Conquest was won not just with swords, but with sacks of grain and the relentless logistics that delivered them. Wheat wasn't just a staple for Roman soldiers, it was their lifeline, accounting for staggering 70 to 80% of their daily calories. But this wasn't the fluffy, oven-fresh bread you might picture. Legionaries relied on buccellatum, a rock-hard biscuit so durable it could last for months without spoiling. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of an energy bar, compact, calorie-dense, and designed for survival. Soldiers would grind their grain ration into coarse flour, mix it with water, and bake it into these portable discs, often breaking their teeth on them before softening the biscuits in broth or vinegar. Archaeologists at sites like Vindolanda, a Roman fort along Hadrian's Wall, have uncovered charred fragments of these wheat cakes, revealing just how central they were to military life. The Vindolanda tablets, thin wooden notes written by soldiers, even mention grain shipments and baking schedules, painting a vivid picture of the bureaucracy behind feeding an empire's army. But the real horror, buccellatum was often crawling with weevils by the time it reached the troops. Soldiers joked bitterly that they were eating more protein than intended, thanks to the extra crunch of infested flour. Yet they endured it because hunger was a far worse enemy. What's remarkable is how this simple food became a logistical masterpiece. Wheat's long shelf life and compact form made it ideal for campaigns stretching across deserts, mountains, and forests. Unlike perishable foods, it could be stockpiled in advance or seized from conquered territories, and when supply lines stretched thin, soldiers could stretch their rations further by foraging wild grains or trading with locals. The system wasn't perfect. Famously, during the Teutoburg forest disaster, trapped legions reportedly resorted to boiling leather for sustenance, but when it worked, it gave Rome's armies an unmatched staying power. Wheat didn't just fill bellies, it fueled conquests, one weevil-ridden biscuit at a time. If buccellatum was the Roman soldier's survival food, puls was his daily comfort, a steaming bowl of porridge that transformed rigid grain rations into something resembling a meal. Made from coarse ground emmer wheat or barley simmered in water, this thick gruel was the ancient equivalent of instant noodles, bland but filling, simple to cook, and endlessly adaptable. Marching camps buzzed with the sound of mess groups preparing it, each soldier taking turns to stir the pot over a shared fire. Unlike the parade ground precision of battle formations, cooking puls was a rare moment of camaraderie, with men swapping tips to make the gloppy mixture palatable. The base recipe was brutally plain, just grain and water, cooked until it reached a gluey consistency. But here's where Roman ingenuity shone. Soldiers doctored their puls with whatever they could scavenge or steal: a drizzle of pungent garum, fermented fish sauce for salty tang, a knob of lard for richness, or wild onions and herbs for freshness. Think of it as the original amphorae, meal Roman embellished. Archaeologists analyzing residues from cookware at Legionary sites like Caerleon in Wales found traces of animal fats and seasonings, proving even frontline troops weren't resigned to total austerity. Experimental archaeology brings this staple to life in startling ways. Modern recreations show that puls cooked over campfires develops a nutty depth, especially when enriched with bacon or cheese, luxuries some legionaries might have bartered for during lulls in campaigning. But the reality was often harsher. Julius Caesar's accounts of campaigning in Gaul mention troops subsisting on puls made from scavenged barley when wheat supplies failed, choking it down while building siege works under enemy arrows. This wasn't just food, it was edible perseverance, a reminder that Rome's conquests were built as much on stubborn, full stomachs as on sharp swords. The genius of puls lay in its flexibility. It could be thin as soup for a quick breakfast or thick as mortar to sustain men through a night watch. When the poet Juvenal sneered that poor Romans lived on puls and politics, he missed the point. For soldiers, this humble gruel was the glue that held the empire together, one scalded spoonful at a time. While wheat and gruel kept Roman soldiers marching, it was salted pork that gave them the strength to fight. Picture whole convoys of mules laden not just with grain, but with barrels of cured meat smoked, brined, and packed to last for months. This wasn't just food, it was military-grade protein, the ancient world's answer to energy bars. The Romans didn't just eat bacon, they industrialized it, turning pig farming into a conquest-fueling operation. Pork was the perfect campaign food. Unlike fresh meat that spoiled within days, cured cuts could withstand the heat of a Judean summer or the damp of a German forest. Legionaries received laridum, salt-cured pork belly or fatback, as part of their rations, a dense, portable source of calories that could be eaten cold or tossed into a pot of puls for extra richness. But producing enough to feed entire legions required staggering scale. In Italy alone, massive Surai pig farms raised thousands of hogs, with herds following armies on campaign like living pantries. Julius Caesar's invasion of Gaul depended on pre-positioned bacon stockpiles, with records noting entire warehouses filled with barrels of salted pork at strategic river crossings. The preservation process was brutally effective. Meats were packed in layers of salt, pressed to remove moisture, then smoked over fruitwood fires, techniques so reliable that some recovered Roman-era hams were still edible after centuries underground. Soldiers carried these cured slabs in their packs, slicing off strips to gnaw during marches or trading chunks for wine with local villagers. Archaeologists at the Solberg fort near Germany's Limes found butchered pig bones with precise cuts matching ration distributions, proving even frontline troops got their share of animal fat. What made this system revolutionary wasn't just the food, it was the logistics. While Germanic warriors relied on hunting or raiding for fresh meat, Rome's legions had guaranteed protein, rain or shine. That consistency bred resilience. When Tacitus described besieged soldiers surviving on half-rotten bacon and moldy grain, he revealed the grim reality. Even spoiled, these rations could mean the difference between mutiny and victory. Salted pork wasn't glamorous, but it turned hungry men into an unstoppable force, one greasy, salty bite at a time. Imagine opening a tiny flask after a grueling march, tipping back a thick, briny liquid that explodes on your tongue with an intensity somewhere between soy sauce and anchovy paste. That's garum, Rome's secret weapon of flavor, the umami bomb that transformed bland rations into something resembling a meal. This wasn't just a condiment, it was the ancient world's answer to Worcestershire sauce, a fermented fish sauce so potent that a single splash could revive even the most exhausted legionary's appetite. Production of garum was anything but delicate. Picture massive coastal factories where layers of fish guts, mackerel, tuna, sardines were packed into vats with herbs and salt, left to ferment under the Mediterranean sun for months. The resulting sludge was strained into amphorae, shipped across the empire and traded like liquid gold. Soldiers didn't just carry garum for taste, they believed it had medicinal properties, using it to disinfect wounds or soothe sore throats. Archaeologists have found miniature flasks designed to clip onto belts, proof that this pungent sauce was as essential to a legionary's kit as his dagger. What made garum revolutionary was its shelf life. Unlike fresh ingredients that spoiled within days, this fermented elixir could survive years in storage, making it perfect for campaigns in far-flung provinces. And it wasn't just for the rank and file. Roman gourmets prized the finest garum-like vintage wine, with aged varieties fetching astronomical prices. Today, you can still taste its legacy in Southeast Asian fish sauces or even modern Caesar dressing, which echoes the bold, salty kick that fueled Rome's legions. Next time you shake Worcestershire sauce onto your steak, remember, you're channeling the same flavor hack that kept Roman soldiers marching, one fishy, glorious drop at a time. Cheese might seem like an unlikely battlefield ration, but for Roman soldiers it was a secret powerhouse, long-lasting, packed with fat and protein, and surprisingly portable. Archaeologists digging at military sites from Hadrian's Wall to the deserts of North Africa have uncovered something startling: scraps of ancient cheese preserved in layers of salt or buried in cool cellars. The most famous, Cassius Helveticus, a hard-aged cheese similar to modern Swiss varieties, mentioned in text as a staple for Alpine campaigns. This wasn't just a snack, it was edible fuel, engineered to withstand weeks on the march without refrigeration. The science behind Roman cheese preservation was ingenious. By pressing curds firmly to remove moisture, then aging them in brine or vinegar, cheesemakers created products that could survive the blistering heat of a Syrian summer or the damp chill of a British winter. Soldiers would carry small wheels or blocks wrapped in cloth or leaves, slicing off chunks to eat with bread or melt into puls for extra calories. Dairy offered what grains couldn't: concentrated fat to keep energy levels high during grueling marches or sieges. And cheese had another advantage. Unlike fresh meat, it rarely spoiled catastrophically. Even if it grew moldy or rock hard, it could still be eaten in desperation. But transporting dairy wasn't without risks. In warm climates, fresh cheese or milk turned rancid within days, a lesson Julius Caesar learned the hard way during his African campaigns, where spoiled supplies reportedly caused waves of illness. That's why the army favored aged varieties or clever workarounds. At Vindolanda, tablets mention soldiers receiving Cassius veteranus, veteran cheese, a deliberately fermented product closer to modern Parmesan, its sharp tang cutting through the monotony of grain rations. Some legionaries even carried powdered cheese, a precursor to today's instant macaroni mixes, ready to be reconstituted with water. The real breakthrough came with cheese's role in bartering. In remote outposts like those along the Danube, local herders traded fresh dairy for Roman salt or tools, creating an informal supply network that kept legions stocked. A soldier's pay stub found in Egypt lists deductions for cheese purchases, proof that even on the empire's fringes, dairy was currency. From the Alps to the Sahara, cheese wasn't just food, it was a logistical triumph, turning milk into muscle for history's most relentless fighting force. Beneath the rough exterior of Rome's legions lay a surprising truth. These battle-hardened soldiers had a sweet tooth. Marching camps from Britannia to Mesopotamia have yielded traces of figs, dates, and even honey cakes, proof that military rations weren't just about survival. Archaeologists sifting through latrine pits at Hadrian's Wall found preserved fig seeds, while digs in North Africa uncovered caches of date pits stuffed into abandoned barrack corners. These weren't accidental snacks, they were strategic energy boosts, lightweight and packed with sugar to fuel sudden bursts of combat or marathon construction projects. The most coveted of these treats came from conquered lands. Carthaginian figs, sun-dried into chewy bricks, were so prized they became a form of informal currency among legionaries. Soldiers deployed to Judea raved about dates from Jericho, sticky, caramel sweet, and capable of lasting months in a pack without spoiling. Even nuts like almonds from Hispania or walnuts from Gaul made their way into ration sacks, offering crucial fats when fresh meat was scarce. What's fascinating is how these foods reveal Rome's supply chains in miniature. A single amphora of Sicilian honey might travel hundreds of miles to sweeten the gruel of a freezing garrison on the Rhine, while olive oil from Baetica, modern Spain, drizzled over stale bread could turn a grim meal into something resembling comfort. Honey was the ultimate multitasker, a natural preservative for fruits, a wound disinfectant, and even an emergency energy shot. Legionaries carried it in small clay pots, mixing it into porridge or spreading it on hardtack to mask the taste of weevils. Experimental historians have recreated these honey cakes using ancient recipes, revealing how a few bites could deliver a quick calorie surge during forced marches. But this wasn't just about practicality. Finding a cache of dried apricots in a desert outpost or sharing stolen figs around a fire offered moments of fleeting pleasure in an otherwise brutal existence. These portable luxuries did more than fill stomachs, they stitched together the empire's diverse corners. A soldier nibbling on Syrian pistachios in Germania or Egyptian carob in Britannia wasn't just eating, he was tasting the reach of Rome itself. Every chew was a reminder that no matter how far from home, the flavors of conquest followed, one sweet, sticky bite at a time. The difference between camp bread and marching bread was the difference between comfort and survival, one a fleeting luxury, the other an unyielding necessity. Panis militaris, the soft, hearth-baked loaf, emerged from clay ovens in permanent forts, its crust golden and interior springy from careful leavening. Archaeologists recreating this bread using ancient techniques found it surprisingly palatable, close to modern sourdough, with a tang from wild yeast captured in the air of Roman bakeries. Soldiers stationed along the Danube or in Syrian outposts might savor this daily, tearing into warm loaves fresh from the Klibanis, a portable oven dragged along with the legion's baggage train. These loaves weren't just food, they were a taste of stability, a reminder that even on the empire's fringes, some rhythms of home persisted, but marched beyond the safety of fortified walls, and panis militaris became a distant dream. In its place, buccellatum, the infamous marching bread that could double as a weapon. Experimental historians grinding spelt flour with ancient replica mills have recreated these biscuits, only to discover their true horror. Baked twice to remove all moisture, they hardened into tooth-cracking discs that could shatter teeth if bitten straight. Soldiers often resorted to soaking them in vinegar or crumbling them into broth, transforming what was essentially edible pottery into something barely chewable. Yet this indestructibility was the point. A single sack of buccellatum could last a legionary months, surviving desert heat, mountain frosts, and even the damp of a Germanic forest without molding. The contrast between these two breads reveals the duality of Roman military life. One symbolized the settled luxury of garrison duty, the scent of baking bread mingling with wood smoke inside a stone fort. The other embodied the grim reality of campaign trails, where every ounce in a soldier's pack had to justify its weight. Modern tests show buccellatum provided nearly twice the calories per pound compared to soft bread, a crucial advantage when space was limited. But there was a psychological cost. Letters from soldiers stationed at remote outposts begged for shipments of real bread, complaining that jawbreakers made from last year's grain left their gums bleeding. Perhaps the most startling discovery comes from dental analysis of Roman soldier remains. Skeletons from frontline units show significantly more tooth wear and fractures than those from rear garrisons, direct evidence of a diet dominated by rock-hard rations. Yet even as they gnawed on these biscuit-like slabs, legionaries found small mercies. At Masada, where the 10th Legion besieged Jewish rebels for months, archaeologists found charred buccellatum fragments, proof that soldiers toasted their rations over fires, perhaps to mimic the comfort of fresh baked bread. In the end, both loaves served Rome's unstoppable machine, one to sustain the body, the other to preserve the soul. When the empire's supply lines stretched thin across the dense forests of Germania or the arid plateaus of Cappadocia, Rome's legions turned the land itself into a pantry. Foraging wasn't just a survival tactic, it was a highly organized operation, as disciplined as any battlefield maneuver. Scouts fanned out ahead of the marching column, mapping stands of wild greens, fruit-bearing trees, and animal trails. Hunting parties, often composed of auxiliaries with local knowledge, stalked deer, boar, and rabbits, while teams of soldiers combed riverbanks for fish or edible plants. But the most controversial harvest came from villages along the route. Grain stores emptied, livestock herds culled, and wine amphorae hauled away under the banner of military necessity. Ancient writers left blistering accounts of this sanctioned plunder. Tacitus recounts Germanic tribes burning their own crops to deny Rome sustenance, while Josephus describes Jewish communities hiding goats in caves to evade legionary requisition squads. Papyri from Roman Egypt detail farmers petitioning officials for compensation after soldiers liberated their barley, proof that even the empire's bureaucracy recognized the line between foraging and theft. Yet for the legions, this was simply logistics. A single legion could consume over 5,000 pounds of meat and grain daily, a demand that local ecosystems couldn't sustainably meet. The math was brutal: feed the army or watch it disintegrate. What's often overlooked is the ingenuity behind these foraging operations. Soldiers carried handbooks like the De Re Militari, which listed edible plants from Britannia to Parthia, nettle soup for scurvy, acorn flour when wheat ran low. Archaeologists at Vindolanda found evidence of blackberry harvesting in August, timed to the fruit's peak ripeness, while digs in Gaul revealed butchered horse bones near marching camps, suggesting even stranded cavalry mounts became protein sources. The true skill lay in balancing urgency with restraint. Strip a region bare and future campaigns would starve, but the system's dark heart was its reliance on fear. Villagers who resisted requisitions risked reprisals, not just stolen sheep, but burned homes or worse. A letter from a Syrian farmer preserved on pottery shard pleads with a centurion, "My children cry from hunger, yet your men took even the seed grain." For every loaf of bread baked from foraged wheat, there was a family left grinding bark to survive the winter. Rome's armies marched on full stomachs, but the land behind them often echoed with emptiness. The relentless rhythm of a Roman march wasn't just fueled by bread and bacon, it depended on something far more basic: water. In an era before purification tablets or plastic bottles, legionaries faced a constant battle against thirst, contaminated streams, and the deadly specter of dysentery. Their solution, a blend of ingenuity and brute practicality that turned every soldier's canteen into a survival tool. Take the laguncula, the standard issue water flask carried by legionaries. Made of bronze or wood and lined with pitch to prevent leaks, these canteens were designed for harsh conditions. Archaeologists have found examples with built-in filters, layers of wool or charcoal to sieve out sediment, proving Romans understood the dangers of dirty water long before germ theory. But the real genius lay in what they added to their water. Soldiers diluted every sip with posca, a sour, vinegary wine so acidic it could kill bacteria. This wasn't the fine Falernian vintage drunk by senators. It was harsh, low-alcohol swill, often made from spoiled grapes or lees left over from winemaking. Yet its acidity made it a lifesaver, sterilizing questionable water sources while providing a carbohydrate boost. The army's obsession with hydration went beyond personal canteens. Marching camps always prioritized water access, with engineers digging wells or diverting streams into temporary aqueducts. Julius Caesar's writings reveal how failing to secure water could doom an entire campaign. During his African war, troops nearly mutinied when enemy forces poisoned oasis supplies. That's why legions traveled with acetaburai, specialists who tested water purity using vinegar. If a source turned murky when vinegar was added, it was deemed unsafe, a crude but effective toxicity test. What's striking is how Pascha became a cultural staple. Officers might grumble about its taste, but rank and file troops loved it, often trading extra rations for double portions. The vinegar's tang masked the flavor of stagnant water, while its slight alcohol content, around 2%, lifted spirits without impairing discipline. Modern recreations show just how functional it was. Mixed with honey and herbs, Pascha becomes a palatable isotonic drink, eerily similar to today's sports beverages. Water discipline was drilled into recruits as rigorously as swordplay. A soldier caught drinking from an untested stream faced flogging, while entire units practiced rationing their lagunculi during training marches. Seneca mocked soldiers for their vinegar faces, but he missed the point. That sour swill wasn't just a drink. It was liquid strategy, turning puddles and rivers into weapons of war. Every sip carried the taste of empire, sharp as a gladius and just as essential to victory. Siege warfare turned the Roman army's meticulous food system into a desperate scramble for survival. At Alesia, where Caesar's legions encircled Vercingetorix's Gauls while being besieged themselves, the math was brutal. 50,000 Roman soldiers trapped between two enemy walls, their supply lines cut with nothing but scavenged grain and the dwindling hope of reinforcements. This wasn't just hunger, it was a slow, grinding calculus of starvation versus victory. Ancient sources describe troops grinding acorns into flour, boiling tree bark, and even roasting leather straps from their shields after soaking them in water for days. The historian Plutarch grimly notes that Caesar's men were eating things no animal would touch, a stark contrast to the usual orderly ration distributions. What made siege rations different wasn't just the lack of food, it was the collapse of systems. Normally, a legion's fermentariae grain officers could predict supply needs down to the day, but sieges defied all planning. At Jerusalem in 70 C, Titus's legions resorted to eating pack mules and siege machines, leather bindings, when Jewish rebels burned surrounding farmland. Archaeologists digging at Masada found evidence of Roman soldiers butchering and salting even scavenged birds, preserving every scrap of protein during their years-long blockade. The horror wasn't just in the starvation, it was in the reversal. These were the same men who, weeks earlier, had dined on garum-drenched pork and fresh-baked bread. Now they chewed boiled grass to silence their stomachs while building siege towers under enemy arrows. Yet even in extremity, Roman discipline held. Caesar's accounts of Alesia revealed chilling pragmatism. Soldiers were given smaller but more frequent portions to stave off collapse, and foraging parties risked death to dig up wild tubers beyond the siege lines. The contrast with their Gallic enemies was telling. While Vercingetorix's warriors allegedly ate their own horses and then starved, Rome's troops endured, not through strength but through system. Their training included survival drills where recruits practiced identifying edible plants or stretching a single day's ration across 3. When Flavius Josephus wrote that Roman soldiers could fight on emptiness, he missed the real lesson. They weren't superhuman, they'd simply turned desperation into doctrine. The grim genius of siege rationing lay in its hierarchy. Officers got half portions, common soldiers less, and allied auxiliaries barely enough to stand. This wasn't cruelty, it was triage, ensuring the army's core remained functional. At Numancia, where Scipio Aemilianus starved out Spanish rebels, legionaries reportedly survived on a handful of moldy wheat per day, while their general conspicuously ate the same slop to maintain morale. Modern calorie estimates suggest some besieged troops subsisted on fewer than 800 daily calories, less than a third of their normal intake. That they could still dig trenches or repel attacks speaks to an almost unthinkable resilience. Siege rations revealed the dark flip side of Rome's logistical brilliance. The same empire that built granaries stretching from Egypt to Germany could reduce its finest soldiers to chewing their own boots. Yet these extremes also birthed innovations. The cibus obsidionalis, siege food, improvised from weeds, rodents, or even crushed bone, became a grisly badge of honor. Veterans of such ordeals were said to receive extra wine rations afterward, a tacit recognition that some hungers couldn't be quantified. In the end, what sustained them wasn't just food, but the unshakable belief that their suffering would be redeemed by victory. When Caesar finally broke Alesia's defenses, his starving men didn't feast, they stood watch, chewing hardtack while the Gauls surrendered. Conquest, it seems, tasted better than any meal. Centurions didn't just command, they dined. While rank-and-file legionaries choked down weevil-infested hardtack, Rome's officers enjoyed a culinary world apart. Tomb reliefs from places like Pompeii and Capua show scenes that would make a common soldier's mouth water. Fresh killed game roasting on spits, amphorae of aged wine being uncorked, and tables groaning under olives, cheese, and even oysters. This wasn't just better food, it was a calculated display of power, a reminder that the army's hierarchy extended all the way to the dining mat. The divide began with the cena militaris, the officers' evening meal, where soldiers huddled around campfires slurping puls. Centurions reclined on couches in their own tents, served by enslaved attendants. Archaeological digs at legionary bases like Vindonissa in Switzerland reveal separate trash pits for officer quarters, filled with sheep knuckles, oyster shells, and fragments of fine Samian ware pottery, starkly different from the broken mess tins and charred grain found in enlisted areas. Even the wine told a story. Common soldiers got pasca, that vinegary swill, while centurions sipped venom, proper wine diluted with water, sometimes even spiced with honey or myrrh. But this privilege wasn't just about taste. Fresh meat, often from hunts organized by the officers' beneficiarii staff, provided protein without the risk of spoiled salt pork. Olives and olive oil, shipped in from Italy or Hispania, offered vital fats that kept energy levels high, and wine. It was medicinal, better for digestion than stagnant water, and a crucial bargaining chip with local elites. A centurion hosting a Gallic chieftain for dinner wasn't just eating well, he was conducting diplomacy with a knife and fork. The most telling evidence comes from pay records. While a legionary earned roughly 12 sestertii per day, a centurion made 15 times that, enough to import delicacies or keep a personal cocos cook. Letters preserved at Vindolanda show officers receiving care packages of figs, peppercorns, and even exotic spices like silphium from North Africa. Yet there was a pragmatic side to this luxury. Well-fed officers meant sharper decision-makers, and their banquets doubled as strategy sessions. When Julius Caesar hosted his famous dinners for both nobles and centurions, he wasn't just being generous, he was buying loyalty, one roasted peacock at a time. The irony: some of the army's greatest mutinies erupted over food disparities. Tacitus recounts Rhine legions in 14C revolting partly because the centurions' tables groaned while we gnawed moldy biscuit. Rome's solution was typically shrewd: temporarily upgrade the men's rations with wine and fresh bread, then quietly restore the hierarchy once tensions eased. Because in the end, the army knew the truth: nothing motivated a soldier quite like the smell of his commander's dinner. Winter transformed a legionary's diet from survival rations to something resembling real food, if they survived the march to get there. When snow-blocked mountain passes and icy rivers halted supply ships, legions retreated to permanent hybrina, fortified winter camps where the rhythm of war gave way to the rhythms of baking, brewing, and butchering. For the first time since spring, soldiers traded rock-hard buccellatum for fresh bread baked in clay ovens, their teeth sinking into loaves still warm from the hearth. Archaeological finds from winter bases like Vetera in Germania reveal a feast of evidence: butchered cattle bones with slaughter patterns showing careful rationing, barrels of fermented cabbage akin to sauerkraut for vitamin C, and even remnants of root cellars stocked with turnips and onions. This wasn't just sustenance, it was rehabilitation, a chance to rebuild bodies battered by months of campaigning. Yet winter's bounty came at a cost. While garrisons near Roman towns could barter for fresh eggs or dairy, Frontier outposts relied on what could be stockpiled before the first frost. Julius Caesar's writings describe frantic autumn supply runs, grain barges racing up the Rhine before ice locked the waterways, or salt caravans crawling through alpine passes ahead of snowdrifts. The difference between a comfortable winter and starvation often hinged on a single missed shipment. At Carnuntum on the Danube, archaeologists found pits lined with straw and packed with smoked meat, their contents preserved so well by the cold that modern researchers could identify the cuts: pork shoulders cured with juniper, venison ribs dried over fruitwood fires. These weren't just meals, they were time capsules of meticulous planning. The true marker of winter's reprieve was Saturnalia, the December festival when military discipline softened for a few days. Commanders distributed extraordinaria special rations of spiced wine, dried figs, and even fresh pork, while rank and file soldiers gambled with dice made from bone fragments. A wax tablet from Vindelander records a soldier's request to his family: send more sausages for Saturnalia, the ones with garlic. For those stationed in Egypt or Syria where winters were mild, the holiday meant citrus fruits from Jericho or dates soaked in honey. But for legions shivering along the northern frontiers, Saturnalia was about warmth. Stews simmered for hours in bronze kakabi pots, their steam mingling with the scent of pine boughs hung in barracks to honor Saturn. Summer campaigns, by contrast, were exercises in brutal pragmatism, with temperatures spoiling fresh meat within hours and grain vulnerable to weevils. Soldiers relied on the indestructible trio of buccellatum, salt pork, and pasca. Marching columns became mobile pantries, their mules laden with amphorae of olive oil, the one fat that wouldn't rancid in the heat. Medical texts from the era warn of camp belly, a euphemism for dysentery sparked by tainted water or maggoty flour. Relief came only through foraging, wild thyme plucked to mask the taste of stale rations, or if the gods smiled, a beehive robbed of its honeycomb. The contrast was staggering. A soldier who wintered on fresh baked bread and smoked venison might spend summer chewing leathery strips of lauritum under a desert sun, dreaming of December's feasts. What's striking is how seasonality shaped Rome's conquests. Germanic tribes exploited this rhythm, launching revolts in spring when legions were weakest from winter foraging. Caesar's invasion of Britannia timed beach landings with summer's reliable harvests, while Trajan's Dacian wars stalled each October as troops withdrew to stockpile food. The empire didn't just fight with gladius and shield, it fought with the calendar, turning seasons into weapons. A legionary gnawing frost-hardened cheese in a German blizzard or sweating over salted fish in Syrian heat wasn't just eating. He was waging Rome's endless war against time itself. Garlic wasn't just for flavor in a Roman soldier's pack, it was frontline medicine. When legionaries suffered infected wounds from barbed arrows or dirty blades, army medics known as medici would crush cloves into paste, packing injuries with this pungent antiseptic long before the discovery of penicillin. Greek physician Dioscorides, whose texts influenced Roman military medicine, wrote that garlic cleanses wounds of rotten matter, and modern science confirms its allicin compound has potent antibacterial properties. Archaeologists excavating a first-century field hospital near Mainz found crushed garlic residue in surgical tool caches, alongside scroll fragments listing garlic poultices for gangrene. This was no folk remedy, it was standardized battlefield triage, turning a humble bulb into a lifesaver. Onions played an equally vital role, not just as rations, but as a bulwark against scurvy. During prolonged sieges or winter blockades, when fresh fruits vanished, soldiers subsisted on stored grains and salted meats. The result: gums bleeding, teeth loosening, and crippling fatigue, the telltale signs of vitamin C deficiency. Roman medics countered this with raw onions, rich in the very nutrient missing from hardtack and cured pork. Celsus, whose De Medicina served as the era's medical manual, prescribed onion juice mixed with honey for spongy gums, while onions roasted in vinegar were fed to troops recovering from marches. Traces of charred onion skins at British fort sites like Chester suggest they were cooked en masse in camp kitchens, their sharp tang cutting through the monotony of gruel while silently staving off disease. Honey, however, was the medic's ultimate multi-purpose tool. Thick, unpasteurized honey, especially varieties from thyme-rich regions like Crete, was slathered on wounds to prevent infection, its high sugar content drawing moisture from bacterial cells while hydrogen peroxide formed naturally during fermentation. A medical tablet recovered from Carnuntum details honey-soaked linen bandages for arrow punctures, echoing Celsus' advice to use it for foul ulcers. But honey's magic didn't stop there. Mixed with vinegar oxymel, it became a cough syrup. Blended with powdered herbs, it eased digestive woes from spoiled rations. At Masada, archaeologists found honey residue in ceramic flasks alongside surgical needles, proof that this golden elixir traveled with the legions as both food and pharmacy. What's remarkable is how these remedies reveal Rome's pragmatic genius. Without understanding germs or vitamins, they empirically identified foods that worked. When garrisons in Germania suffered fewer infections than those in Syria, medics correlated it with local garlic-heavy diets and adjusted rations accordingly. A soldier's daily bread might be supplemented with bitter herbs like horehound to strengthen the lungs, or juniper berries chewed to ward off swamp fevers in rainy campaigns. This wasn't just eating, it was biohacking, turning every meal into preventative care. The legions didn't just conquer with steel, they healed with honey, fought scurvy with onions, and sterilized wounds with garlic. In an age before microscopes, their medics crafted a culinary first aid kit so effective that some methods persisted into World War I. Behind every victorious legion stood not just warriors, but a kitchen staff stirring pots of medicinal porridge, ensuring Rome's soldiers could march and heal on full stomachs. Rome's legions didn't just conquer territories, they absorbed them, and nowhere is that more obvious than in their cooking pots. March into a fort on the foggy frontiers of Britannia, and you'd find legionaries drinking dark, malty beer brewed from local barley, nothing like the thin Roman pasca. Over in Germania, the smoky aroma of cured venison and boar would waft through camps, adopted from tribes the empire had subjugated. Even in the deserts of North Africa, soldiers developed a taste for spiced lamb skewers, a far cry from the standard lauretum. This wasn't just hunger, it was history's most delicious case of cultural osmosis. Archaeology tells the story best. At Vindolanda, near Hadrian's Wall, excavations revealed a hybrid kitchen where Roman-style puls simmered alongside British-style griddle cakes. Charred residue on pots showed barley and oats, indigenous grains rarely eaten in Italy, mixed with olive oil shipped from the Mediterranean. A soldier's letter scrawled on a wooden tablet even requests that good British ale instead of the usual vinegar wine. Over on the Rhine, cooking utensils found in forts mimic Germanic designs, with deep-sided pans perfect for smoking meats. The legions didn't just impose their foodways, they adapted, adopting whatever kept them fed and fighting. Some of the most striking proof comes from teeth. Isotope analysis of skeletons from Roman frontier forts shows soldiers stationed in Gaul developed distinct dental signatures from eating more dairy, likely adopting local cheese-making techniques. In Egypt, troops buried near Luxor have telltale traces of dates and figs in their bones, staples of the Nile diet. Even the proudest centurion couldn't resist the pull of original flavors. When the poet Martial grumbled about beer-drinking legionaries in cold provinces, he was mourning more than lost tradition. He was watching Rome's identity melt into its conquests. But this exchange wasn't just one-sided. Roman supply chains introduced Mediterranean staples to the edges of empire. Amphorae dug up in Scotland still smell of fermented fish sauce, while British hill forts suddenly gained olive pits after legions arrived. The ultimate irony, Germanic warriors who once mocked Roman soft bread eventually demanded it in peace treaties. Food became a currency of control. Accept our wheat, and you accept our rule. Yet in barracks from Judea to Britannia, the real victory belonged to the unknown cooks who blended cultures over a campfire, creating dishes that outlasted empires. Every bite was a silent treaty, a reminder that conquest works both ways. Every meal in a Roman marching camp was more than just fuel. It was a sacred act, bound to gods who demanded their share before any soldier took a bite. At dawn, before the grind of drills or marches began, the aroma of burning wheat cakes would rise from makeshift altars as centurions led their men in offerings to Jupiter Optimus Maximus. These weren't perfunctory gestures. Each crackle of salted barley in the flames carried the weight of divine contract. Protect us, the smoke seemed to plead, and we will feed your fire. The army's most vital supply line wasn't from granaries. It ran straight to Olympus, among the pantheon of military cults. None feasted as dramatically as the worshippers of Mithras. In the torchlit underground shrines found near forts from Hadrian's Wall to the Syrian frontier, initiates reclined on benches where actual bull's blood might still stain the stones. The ritual feast known as the Tauroctony reenacted Mithras slaying the cosmic bull, with soldiers sharing wine and bread said to be infused with the animal's life force. Archaeology reveals the leftovers of these sacred meals, bones from carefully butchered young bulls showing precise cuts matching ceremonial portions, alongside tiny votive loaves stamped with solar crosses. For legionaries sworn to this Persian-born god, eating became an act of cosmic warfare, each mouthful a renewal of their vow to fight darkness itself. But not all divine meals were so theatrical. The daily mola salsa offering, a handful of salted spelt tossed into the campfire, was as routine as polishing armor. Priests called victimariae supervised these moments, ensuring no greedy soldier snatched the god's portion. A papyrus from Egypt's Fayum Oasis records a centuries-grain account with a stark notation: 2 measures deducted for Jupiter's cakes, lest he withdraw his favor. The message was clear: even in famine, the deities ate first. What's often overlooked is how these rituals forged unity across Rome's multicultural legions. A Syrian archer might worship Baal, a Germanic cavalryman Donar, but all raised their mess tins when the commanders sacrificed to the standards. The shared act of feeding divine flames, whether with Mithraic bull meat or Vestal virgin blessed grain, transformed disparate men into a single body. Tacitus describes Batavian auxiliaries and Italian legionaries bonding over a communal feast honoring Mars before the Battle of Mons Graupius, their cultural differences momentarily dissolved in the smoke of roasted meats. The genius lay in this culinary theology's flexibility. Local gods were welcomed into the camp's pantheon with their own food rites, Egyptian Anubis receiving honey cakes at Memphis, Celtic Epona given oats at Rhine forts. Even the mess hall became sacred space, soldiers touching their daily bread to the unit signum, standard before eating, as archaeologists deduce from gold leaf flakes found on loaves at Vindonissa. This wasn't superstition, it was spiritual logistics, ensuring every crumb carried the weight of empire and eternity. When a legionary bit into his hardtack, he wasn't just chewing wheat. He was consuming the blessing of gods who, if fed properly, might just let him live to see another dawn. Rome didn't just defeat enemies in battle, it starved them into surrender, turning hunger into a weapon as precise as any gladius. At Jerusalem in 70 CE, Titus's legions didn't storm the city's walls outright. They coiled around it like a constrictor, methodically cutting every supply line. Jewish historian Josephus describes the horror. Rebel factions inside the city burned their own grain stores to deny them to rivals, while Roman engineers built siege ramparts so vast they blocked sunlight to the crops below. The streets, once bustling with pilgrims and merchants, became charnel pits where mothers fought over scraps of boiled leather. Meanwhile, just beyond the siege lines, Titus's troops feasted on fresh bread from mobile field ovens and smoked meat from herds driven behind their fortifications. The message was clear: Rome could wait. The siege of Numantia in 133 BC revealed the chilling efficiency of this strategy. For 15 months, Scipio Aemilianus encircled the Spanish stronghold with 7 concentric trenches and watchtowers, ensuring not even a stray rabbit could slip through. Archaeologists excavating the site found evidence of the Numantines' desperation: gnawed human bones mixed with animal remains, proof of cannibalism in the final weeks. Yet in the Roman camp, the legions dined on grain shipped from North Africa and salted fish from Cadiz, their rations so abundant they could afford to hurl loaves of bread over the walls as psychological warfare. A fragment of Scipio's speech survives: "Let them see our plenty and know their fate." This wasn't just brutality, it was bureaucracy. Quartermasters calculated exactly how much grain an enemy city needed to survive, then systematically destroyed fields, poisoned wells, and bribed local traders to divert supplies. At Masada, the 10th Legion didn't scale the cliffs until the rebels' own cisterns ran dry, letting thirst do what swords could not. Even rebels who tried to escape were often herded back into besieged cities by Roman cavalry, tightening the noose further. The Empire's greatest innovation wasn't its siege engines, it was the ledger books tracking every bushel of wheat an enemy lacked, yet the true masterpiece lay in the aftermath. When cities finally capitulated, Rome's first act was often to distribute food not from mercy, but to showcase the cost of resistance, Aemilianus at Numantia ordered survivors fed before selling them into slavery, while Titus allowed Jerusalem's starving masses to scavenge his abandoned siege camps for leftover crumbs. These weren't kindnesses, they were object lessons. The empire's might wasn't just measured in victories, but in who controlled the next meal. A century later, when Trajan besieged Dacia, King Decebalus chose suicide over surrender, having seen how Rome's mercy tasted when seasoned with humiliation. Hunger was the silent legionary, and its campaigns never ended. Rome's legions conquered across seasons and continents because they mastered something far older than steel, the science of stopping time. While enemies watched their harvests rot, Roman quartermasters wielded preservation techniques so advanced they bordered on alchemy. Take smoking, not the haphazard campfire drying of tribal armies, but a systematic art where pork shoulders hung in timber smokehouses for weeks, infused with juniper and bay to repel insects and bacteria. Excavations at the Salzburg fort revealed brick-lined smoking chambers capable of processing 50 hams simultaneously, their walls blackened by decades of controlled fires. The result, meat that stayed edible for over a year, light enough for a marching pack, dense with calories and imbued with that unmistakable tang that made even the toughest cuts palatable after months on the road. Then there was pickling, elevated beyond simple brining. Legionary cooks packed olives and vegetables in fermented fish sauce garum, creating a dual preservation punch where the sauce's salt and acidity acted like a biochemical lock on spoilage. Amphorae recovered from shipwrecks off Corsica still held cabbage leaves preserved this way, their crispness miraculously intact after 2 millennia underwater. But the real genius lay in scaling these methods. Entire warehouses along the Rhine stored thousands of these ceramic jars, each sealed with pine pitch stoppers to create an oxygen-free tomb for food. Modern experiments show Roman pickled goods could last up to 5 years without refrigeration, a lifeline for garrisons in frozen Germania or scorching Syria where fresh produce was a distant dream. The crowning achievement, Heron of Alexandria's Clibanus, a portable field oven that let legions bake fresh bread anywhere. Unearthed sketches show a collapsible bronze furnace with nested compartments, upper shelves for slow roasting meats, lower chambers for baking loaves, all fueled by minimal charcoal thanks to ingenious heat circulation channels. Replicas based on Heron's designs prove a single Clibanus could feed a century of soldiers with just 20 pounds of charcoal per day, turning foraged grain into steaming bread within hours. These weren't just tools, they were force multipliers. While Gallic warbands shivered on raw barley during winter campaigns, Roman troops dined on warm oat bread, their morale and digestion intact. But the true masterpiece of Roman preservation was psychological. By ensuring troops ate familiar foods year-round, smoked Campanian pork in Britain, pickled Spanish olives in Dacia, the army sustained more than bodies. It maintained identity, a taste of Rome in every bite. When archaeologists found a shattered amphora in the Teutoburg forest, its interior still coated with olive residue, they uncovered more than a storage jar. They found a civilization's stubborn refusal to let distance or darkness dictate its menu. The legions didn't just carry weapons, they carried microclimates of abundance, ensuring that where Rome marched, decay itself retreated. Few punishments struck deeper into a legionary's pride than being forced to trade his wheat ration for barley. After decimation, the brutal discipline where every 10th man in a disgraced unit was clubbed to death by his own comrades, survivors weren't just marked by blood. They were starved of dignity, their humiliation measured in grains. Barley, coarse and bitter, was the food of slaves and livestock, a deliberate demotion from the sacred wheat that symbolized Roman citizenship. Tacitus paints the scene with grim clarity, defeated legions shuffling past their officers to receive their rations, heads bowed as their hands closed around rough barley loaves instead of the fine white wheat flour that had once filled their mess tins. The psychological warfare was calculated. Roman commanders understood that food wasn't just sustenance, it was identity. Wheat ground into bread or puls connected soldiers to the heart of empire, a daily reminder of their place in Rome's grand machine. Barley, by contrast, was the diet of barbarians and beasts, forcing disgraced legions to eat it for months, sometimes years, eroded their spirit as effectively as any battlefield defeat. Archaeologists in Numidia uncovered a mass grave of soldiers from a decimated unit, their skeletal remains showing telltale signs of malnutrition. Analysis revealed barley's signature, worn teeth from grinding coarse grains, and bones weakened by the nutrient-poor diet. These men hadn't just been punished, they'd been unmade, their bodies betraying their fall from grace. The cruelty lay in the contrast. While nearby legions feasted on fresh-baked panis militaris, disgraced units choked down panis castrensis, barley loaves so dense they were nicknamed jawbreakers. Even their cooking methods reinforced their shame. Wheat-eating soldiers baked in proper ovens, barley rations were often hastily roasted on flat stones, leaving them half-burnt and gritty with ash. Surviving letters from a decimated legionary stationed in Germania complain of relentless stomach pain, a consequence of barley's harsh fibers tearing through undernourished guts. But the true genius and horror of this punishment was its public spectacle. Decimated legions weren't hidden away, they were put on display, their barley meals consumed in full view of their peers. Josephus describes Vespasian parading a decimated Syrian legion through Antioch, forcing them to eat barley gruel in the forum while citizens jeered. Every slurping mouthful broadcast their failure, turning sustenance into theater. Rome knew hunger could break armies faster than swords, but by weaponizing something as mundane as bread, they proved conquest wasn't just about land. It was about the willingness to kneel, chew, and swallow one's disgrace without complaint. Gladiators were Rome's celebrity fighters, but their diet would make a legionary shudder. While soldiers gnawed on protein-rich bacon and weevil-infested hardtack, these arena stars slurped down gladiatorum sagina, a thick bean-heavy gruel so carb-loaded it earned them the nickname horderae, or barley men. Archaeologists analyzing gladiator bones from Ephesus found telltale signs of this starchy diet, layers of dense bone growth resembling modern weightlifters, alongside higher strontium levels linked to massive legume consumption. This wasn't food designed for endurance or conquest. It was edible padding, engineered to absorb blows and bleed spectacularly without vital organs being fatally damaged. The contrast with legionary rations couldn't be starker. Soldiers needed stamina for 30-mile marches and battlefield agility, so their meals balanced grains with smoked meats, cheese, and fermented fish sauce. Gladiators, by comparison, were essentially carbohydrate shock absorbers. Their gruel, primarily barley, lentils, and fava beans, provided subcutaneous fat to cushion sword slashes while keeping muscles visibly defined for the crowd. Roman physician Galen scoffed at their diet, calling it fit for pigs, not warriors, but the logic was brutally practical. A gladiator with a layer of fat over muscle bled more dramatically but healed faster than a lean soldier with deep tissue damage. Modern myths paint gladiators as beefy athletes gorging on meat, but bone chemistry tells a different story. Stable isotope studies show their protein intake was shockingly low, less than half that of contemporary legionaries. Even their occasional treats served arena theatrics. Before fights, they drank ash-infused tonics, recreated by historians to taste like gritty mineral water to strengthen bones, not unlike modern calcium supplements. After bouts, victorious gladiators got honey wine, not for celebration, but because its quick sugars sped recovery for the next spectacle. The real irony. Legionaries disdained gladiators as soft but envied their guaranteed meals. While soldiers risked starvation on campaign, gladiators ate regular, calorie-dense portions tailored to their role as living entertainment. Their diet was less about strength than survivability, enough energy to fight, enough fat to bleed, and enough carbs to keep ticket sales booming. In the end, both diets served Rome's needs, one to expand the empire, the other to distract it. Campaigning in the desert turned Rome's meticulous supply system into a desperate gamble against the sun. While legions in Gaul or Germania worried about grain shipments, those marching into Africa or the Near East faced a deadlier shortage of water. Every drop became a strategic asset, fought over like gold. Soldiers slung goatskins over their shoulders, the leather blackened by tar to slow evaporation, each one holding just enough to keep a man alive for a day under the scorching heat. Trajan's column in Rome shows this struggle in stone relief. Legionaries digging wells with their bare hands in the Numidian sand, their shields stacked nearby like temporary walls against the wind. These weren't just men at work, they were survivalists engineering liquid lifelines. The nightmare wasn't just thirst, it was deception. Desert tribes perfected the art of poisoning oases or filling wells with sand before retreating, leaving parched legions to stagger into mirages. Julius Caesar's accounts from his African campaign describe soldiers sucking moisture from wild melons or licking dew off their shields at dawn. Archaeologists surveying old Roman marching routes in Libya found clusters of broken amphorae near dry riverbeds, evidence of emergency water caches that still weren't enough. The real horror came when discipline cracked. During Corbulo's campaign in Armenia, an entire cohort reportedly drank from a sulfur spring in panic, only to collapse with crippling stomach cramps while the enemy watched. Rome's answer was infrastructure on the move. Engineers prefabricated wooden well casings that could be assembled like puzzle pieces over freshly dug holes, preventing collapse in loose sand. Scouts carried hollow rids to probe for hidden groundwater, a trick learned from Nabatean traders. Some legions even dragged along giant lead-lined barrels called dolia, which could condense nighttime moisture into drinkable amounts, an ancient version of atmospheric water harvesting. But the true innovation was psychological. Commanders like Trajan ordered surplus water dumped onto the ground during negotiations with desert tribes, a flaunt of abundance designed to demoralize foes who knew the value of every wasted sip. The stakes were etched into the bones of the fallen. Skeletal remains from a lost outpost in the Sahara show signs of severe dehydration, shriveled sinus cavities, teeth worn down from chewing leather water carriers in futility. Yet for every tragedy, there were triumphs of ingenuity. At Masada, the 10th Legion built an entire aqueduct system to haul water up cliffs during their siege, turning a barren rock into a fortified oasis. The desert didn't just test Rome's soldiers, it exposed the empire's core truth: conquest wasn't about strength alone, but the ability to bend nature itself to a legion's will, one crumbling well shaft at a time. Life on a Roman warship turned the soldiers' diet into a battle against decay itself. While legionaries marched with sacks of grain and smoked pork, sailors faced a far grimmer reality: meals dominated by rock-hard buccellatum nauticum and fish so heavily salted it could sting the eyes. These ship's biscuits made army hardtack seem luxurious by comparison. Baked up to 4 times to withstand humid holds, they often shattered into splinters that cut lips and gums. Archaeologists examining galley wrecks off Sicily found barrels of these biscuits fossilized into near stone, some still bearing the teeth marks of desperate men who tried gnawing them straight. The difference between land and sea rations wasn't just taste, it was a matter of survival where every moldy crumb could mean the difference between mutiny and obedience. Fresh water was the true currency aboard ship, guarded more fiercely than gold. Legionaries on campaign could dig wells or melt snow, but sailors trapped on the Mediterranean's brine had to ration every swallow. A recovered naval log from Augustus' fleet details the brutal arithmetic. Each rower received just 2 sextarii, about 1 liter per day, barely enough to stave off dehydration under the scorching deck. Thirst became such a relentless enemy that crews would lick the morning dew off sails or chew leather straps to stimulate saliva. The discovery of makeshift condensers, clay pots lined with sponges to capture humidity, and sunken ship remains shows just how creative desperation could get. Then there was the horror of salsamentum, salt-cured fish so pervasive it permeated every corner of ship life. Excavations of a 1st century galley near Marseille revealed amphorae still packed with sardines layered in salt, their bones fused into briny bricks by centuries underwater. Sailors ate this protein source raw or mashed into a pungent paste, as cooking fires were banned on wooden ships except in dead calm. The resulting diet was so monotonous that accounts from Misenum, Rome's great naval port, describe crews trading entire pay stubs for a single fresh onion or handful of dates during shore leave. But the true nightmare came on extended voyages, when weevils and beetles infested the biscuit stores. Unlike land-based legions who could occasionally forage, sailors were trapped with their crawling rations. A graffiti scrawl found on a Pompeian warehouse wall, likely by a disgruntled sailor, jokes darkly, "The biscuits walk to us now, no need to reach into the barrel." Modern experiments recreating naval biscuit storage show how quickly infestations spread. Within weeks, a single contaminated batch could turn into a squirming mass, forcing crews to eat in the dark to avoid seeing what extra protein they were consuming. What's startling is how these brutal conditions sparked innovation. Naval surgeons prescribed garlic and vinegar mixtures to counteract scurvy long before the disease was understood, while captains stationed in Egypt learned to pack lentils and chickpeas, legumes that resisted pests better than grain. The poet Lucilius sarcastically called sailors the salt-blooded men, but their suffering shaped Rome's mastery of maritime supply chains. Every worm-eaten biscuit and briny fish gut was a grim stepping stone to empire, proving that dominion over the waves began not with oars or sails, but with the relentless calculus of full bellies and empty water casks. At Masada, where Jewish rebels made their last stand against Rome's 10th Legion, archaeologists sifting through the ashes found something haunting: tiny, carbonized fragments of dates. These weren't just snacks, they were the final bites of a doomed community, carefully portioned as the siege walls closed in. The rebels knew the end was coming, yet they chose to spend their dwindling moments sharing sticky sweet fruit, a last taste of normalcy before the flames. Nearby in the Roman assault camp, the story was different. Excavations revealed animal bones cracked open for marrow, the desperate act of soldiers who'd run their supply lines ragged to starve out their enemy. Both sides in their own ways churned food into farewells. The archaeology of last meals tells us more than what people ate. It reveals what they valued when time ran out. At Avaricum, where Caesar's legions trapped the Gauls in 52 BC, diggers found cauldrons still holding traces of a final stew: beef, barley, and wild herbs cooked as the walls crumbled. The meat was tough, likely from an old ox slaughtered in haste, but the inclusion of herbs like thyme and mint suggests someone cared enough to make it palatable. Contrast that with the Roman camp outside Numancia, where skeletons of besiegers were found clutching sacks of half-rotted grain. Even in death, their fingers curled around the rations that failed to save them. Perhaps the most poignant discovery comes from Jerusalem's siege in 70 CE. Beneath a collapsed house in the upper city, archaeologists unearthed a child's skeleton with a fig still clenched in its small hand. The fruit, preserved by centuries of dry heat, had been a treasure in those final days, a fleeting moment of sweetness in a city reduced to cannibalism. Josephus writes of mothers boiling leather belts, but this fig whispers a quieter truth. Even amidst horror, the instinct to savor something familiar, something good, never fully vanishes. Food in these moments wasn't just sustenance, it was defiance. At Duropos on the Euphrates, where Persians besieged a Roman garrison in the 3rd century, soldiers' final act wasn't to burn documents or destroy weapons, it was to feast. Excavated trash pits held stacks of smashed wine amphorae and the bones of every edible animal in the fort, from horses to songbirds. They died bloated and drunk rather than hungry and meek. Meanwhile, in the rebel tunnels of Masada, storage jars were found deliberately shattered, not by Romans, but by zealots ensuring nothing would remain for their conquerors. A meal uneaten can be as powerful as a sword unsheathed. What lingers in these fragments is the unbearable humanity of hunger, the Gaul gnawing a bone as flames licked his village walls, the Roman sailor licking salt off his lips before a sinking ship took him, the mother hiding a handful of raisins in her tunic for a child who wouldn't live to taste them. These aren't just historical footnotes. They're reminders that war's true cost isn't measured in territory taken, but in the last morsel swallowed before the dark closes in. Every crumb becomes an epitaph. Rome's legions conquered the known world not just with disciplined formations and sharp gladii, but with an unglamorous, meticulously calculated weapon: their rations. Every rock-hard biscuit of buccellatum, every strip of salt-cured pork, every splash of vinegary pasca was a strategic masterpiece, engineered to turn hungry men into an unstoppable force. This wasn't just food, it was edible logistics, a system so finely tuned that modern militaries still study it. The U.S. Army's amphorae, meals ready to eat, owe more to Roman ingenuity than you might think. Both prioritize calorie density, portability, and shelf stability, but Rome did it without vacuum seals or chemical preservatives. Picture a legionary's pack, a week's worth of meals crammed into a few pounds of indestructible bread and smoked meat, while today's soldiers carry amphorae weighing twice as much for the same duration. The empire's real genius wasn't just in feeding its troops, but in making every bite a bulwark against chaos. The parallels run deeper than packaging. Just as Roman quartermasters balanced grain shipments with local foraging, modern militaries blend pre-packaged rations with fresh rations when bases allow. And like legionaries doctoring their poles with stolen onions or traded cheese, soldiers today spice up amphorae with hot sauce or local treats. But there's one stark difference: variety. Where a modern grunt might have 24 meal options, a Roman soldier's menu rarely changed: wheat, pork, and vinegar, day after day, yet this monotony was its own kind of strength. While enemies crumbled under famine or dysentery, Rome's legions endured on their grim, dependable fare. The empire didn't just win battles, it won the war of attrition, one weevil-infested biscuit at a time. What's truly humbling is how little the core challenges have changed. Whether it's a legionary marching through Germania or a marine patrolling Hellman, the same questions persist. How do you keep food safe without refrigeration? How do you stretch supplies when convoys are ambushed? Rome's answers, smoking, salting, fermenting, were born of necessity, yet they echo in today's freeze-dried entrees and vacuum-sealed sides. The biggest lesson isn't about nutrition, it's about resilience. An army that masters its stomach will always outlast one that relies on feasts. So here's the real question for you. If you had to march with history's most hardened soldiers, which Roman ration would you dare to try? The iron-jawed buccellatum, the stomach-churning garum, or maybe a swig of that vinegary pasca to wash it all down? Drop your pick in the comments, and remember, no complaining about a Maurice until you've tasted conquest the Roman way.